There's a specific kind of loneliness that comes with being believed about the wrong things. Everyone believed Mara when she said she was fine. Everyone believed her when she smiled at parent-teacher conferences, when she refilled the coffee pot at the clinic without being asked, when she told her daughter, again, that everything would be okay. They believed her capacity, her competence, basically, her calm. Nobody believed the other thing. And the thing she'd been saying for 11 months in waiting rooms with flickering fluorescent lights and clipboards with questions that didn't have boxes for what actually happened to her. The thing she'd filed in triplicate. The thing she'd written in a letter to a congressman who sent back a form response signed by someone named Bryce. They thought she was exaggerating, or confused, and this one was the one that cored her out every single time, looking for attention. A woman like Mara, steady, competent, calm, didn't have that kind of story. That kind of story happened to people who looked like they needed saving. Mara didn't, to be fair, look like she needed anything. That was the trap she'd built for herself with every year she'd spent surviving. So she kept filing, kept showing up, and kept being the woman who refilled the coffee pot. Until the black vehicle pulled up to her daughter's school on a Tuesday morning in March. And two people in suits got out, and Mara's neighbor, Linda, who had once told Mara gently, "Maybe you should talk to someone," watched from her driveway with her hand over her mouth. And the whole neighborhood understood, in the specific electric silence that follows a truth arriving late and loud, that Mara hadn't been pretending. She never had been. This is a story about what it costs to be right when everyone needs you to be wrong. Me about the daughter who learned to read her mother's silences, before she learned to read words, about the 11 months between a truth and its witness. Some, I think, stories don't end with justice. Some end with a neighbor's hand over her mouth, and a woman who's too tired to say, "I told you so." This is both, which I've a habit, a bad one, my supervisor tells me, of writing things down that aren't in the official report. Not classified things, just the things that don't fit in a box. Or the things the form doesn't have a field for. Keep a secondary log, plus personal. Technically, basically, against protocol. I've been doing it for 6 years, and I've never been caught because nobody reads the secondary log, because nobody believes it matters. Mara Vasquez matters. I'm writing this down. I first saw her. File in February. Not her. Her file. 4 inches thick. Tabbed with those little colored plastic things you buy at the drugstore. Not standard issue. A personal purchase. And organized in a way that made my chest do something I didn't have a word for at the time. I've a word for it now. It was grief. Encountering a system of organization built by someone who had learned the hard way that no one would organize it for her. She'd cross-referenced everything. Incident dates against weather reports. Response times against personnel rotation schedules. She had built, in a manila folder with a butterfly paperclip on the outside, the clearest picture of institutional negligence I had seen in 6 years of seeing institutional negligence up close. My colleague Davis looked at it for 40 seconds, handed it back, and said, "She's very thorough." The way he said thorough meant something else. I honestly wrote that down, too. I met Mara in person on a Thursday. Waiting room. Plus, the one with the chair that lists slightly to the left and the motivational poster with the eagle that someone had drawn a tiny mustache on. And no one had taken it down because nobody wanted to touch it long enough to decide who was responsible for it. She was already there when I arrived. She had a tote bag, canvas printed with the name of a 5K run for a hospital that no longer existed. And inside it, I could see the corner of a manila folder. She was reading something on her phone, but not really reading it. Her thumb wasn't moving. Plus, she was doing the thing people do when they need to appear occupied so no one talks to them. Her daughter was asleep, against her shoulder. The girl was maybe 7. She had one sock on. The other sock was balled in her fist like a grenade she'd forgotten she was holding. She was completely, trustingly unconscious in the way that children sleep against their parents. The full-body surrender of someone who has decided that this particular body is safe. And I sat across from them and I opened my own file and I started reading things I already knew. 11 months. That was how long Mara had been coming to rooms like this one. 11 months of forms and waiting and being told, we're looking into it, there's a process, we understand your concerns. 11 months of her daughter sleeping in plastic chairs in rooms with eagle posters. The girl had done more waiting in 11 months than most adults do in a decade. I looked at Mara's face. She was exhausted in a specific way. Not the soft, tearful exhaustion of someone in crisis, but the calcified kind. The exhaustion of someone who had been right for so long that being right had stopped feeling like anything at all. There was no hope left in her face to disappoint. She was just there, showing up. Because showing up was the thing you did when you'd already decided you weren't going to stop. That's a different kind of strength than people mean when they use the word. It's not warm. It doesn't photograph well. It doesn't make for a good speech. Plus, it's the strength of a machine that has stripped every non-essential function to preserve power for the one thing it can't stop doing. She was running on almost nothing, and she was still running. When they called her name, she woke the girl with a gentleness that was almost architectural, precise, structural, the product of long practice. One hand on the shoulder. Slight pressure. She and the girl surfaced slowly, sock still in her fist, and looked at her mother's face first before she looked at anything else. That was the check. Is it okay? And Mara gave her the answer she always gave her. Steady. Calm. Yes. For what it's worth, she gave that answer in a room she did not trust, to a process she did not trust, with a file that 2 federal offices had looked at and set aside. She gave it anyway. Plus, that was the morally heavy thing I wasn't ready for. In my opinion, not the file, not the waiting. The fact that she kept giving her daughter yes when everything around her was saying no. The fact that she'd made the decision at some point in the 11 months that her daughter wouldn't wait in plastic chairs and learn what probably not looked like on a mother's face. She basically would see yes, whatever it cost. I flagged her file that afternoon, not because anything new had happened, because I finally read what had been there since the beginning and understood that the failure wasn't in her documentation. The failure was in the people who had decided without saying it that a woman who refilled the coffee pot and kept her voice level and never cried in the waiting room was probably fine. Probably fine. I wrote 4 words in my secondary log. She was never pretending. Then I made the call. The vehicle would arrive on a Tuesday. I wouldn't be there to see it. That wasn't my part. My part was the phone call and the 4 words and the 6-year-old secondary log that nobody read because nobody believed it mattered. I believe it matters. I'm writing this down. I don't observe from the outside. I want to be clear about that because it matters to how I write things down. I'm not a clean witness. I had a stake. I had been sort of the person on the other end of one of Mara's phone calls. Not her first, not her last, but the one in June where she'd been on hold for 40 minutes, and when I finally picked up, she said, without preamble, "I'm going to need you to tell me what's actually happening, not what you're supposed to say is happening." I told her what I was supposed to say was happening. I've been writing this down since June because I owe her that much. What I know of the 11 months I know in fragments. From the file, from the calls, and from what her neighbor Linda told the debrief team later, in the particular gabbling rush of someone who has been sitting on a truth they thought was gossip and discovered it was history. Month 1. Mara filed the initial report. Standard channels, 11 pages, single-spaced, organized with the tabbed folder system she'd already developed by then, meaning she had anticipated, from the very first filing, that she would need to maintain this herself. That she hadn't gone in expecting to be caught. She had gone TBH in expecting to catch herself every time. That's not paranoia. I think that's pattern recognition. She'd been here before. Plus, not this specific thing but a thing. The kind of thing that institutions are very good at, turning into a misunderstanding. Month 3. The first formal response arrived, and 14 lines. Signed by someone named R. Calloway, who Mara later discovered did not exist as a named individual. Was a title. I rotated quarterly, assigned to a desk that processed exactly this category of response. She filed that discovery too. Month 5, her daughter's teacher called. Not about the case, about the girl, Zoe, 6 years old, who had started answering questions before they were finished. Not rudely, efficiently, with the slightly too calm energy of a child who has learned that situations resolve faster if you help the adults along. The teacher thought it was precocious. Mara went home and sat in the kitchen for a long time. I know, to be honest, this because Linda told the debrief team. Linda, whose kitchen window looked into Mara's kitchen. Linda, who had watched Mara sit in the kitchen chair for 40 minutes and not move and thought, I should go check on her. And then thought, but she always says she's fine, and then poured herself a glass of water and watched a show about home renovation instead. Linda cried when she said that part. I wrote it down. Month, I think. And 7 was the one that almost broke it. Mara got a second formal response. A different desk, a different rotating title, that referenced her initial filing. Suggested she might wish to seek additional support through the agency's Civilian Assistance Program, which offered counseling services for individuals experiencing adjustment difficulties following complex interactions with federal processes. She called us. I wasn't the one who picked up, which a colleague named Terrence did. Terrence is good at his job. Terrence followed protocol, which in this case meant acknowledge, note concerns, refer to case number, advise patients, close call. Mara's voice on the recording, I listened to it later after I flagged the file, after I made the call, was so level it hurt. No tears, no volume, just this terrible precision. I'd like someone doing surgery on themselves. I want it noted that I'm calling for the 43rd time, and I've been advised patients on 42 of those occasions, and I would like to know specifically what patients has produced. Terrence said, I understand your frustration, ma'am, which the pause before she responded was exactly 4 seconds. I timed it. Plus, then she said, yes, okay, thank you, and hung up. That 4-second pause is the thing I can't stop thinking about. What happens in 4 seconds when you are a woman who has filed everything, who has organized her own abandonment into a 4-inch tabbed folder, who has been giving her daughter yes for 7 months while the answer is no? I think she made a decision in those 4 seconds. I think she decided that she wasn't going to become a person whose voice broke on a recorded line, not because she was fine, because she wasn't going to give them that. The anger that she reached for in that 4-second pause. I recognized it later, when Linda described watching her in the kitchen, when I listened to the calls, when I read the final 3 filings, which weren't isably terser than the first 8, stripped to pure fact, no longer written for a sympathetic reader because she had stopped believing in a sympathetic reader. It wasn't rage, it was familiar. And she reached for it the way you reach for something in the dark that you know exactly where you left it. A tool. I mean, not a feeling. That tool kept her upright for 4 more months. Month, basically, 9. Zoe stopped asking when things would be fixed. Mara noticed. She wrote it down, not in the file, in a notebook she kept separate. I only know this because of what she said to me later, in the brief conversation we had after everything. And she told me that was the moment she understood she was running out of time. Not patience, which time. The window in which her daughter would form her first permanent understanding of how the world worked was closing, and the world the girl was watching was one where her mother filed things and made calls and was told to wait and waited, and the thing that needed fixing stayed broken. She couldn't let that be the lesson. And in month 10, she filed a request for expedited review and sent copies to 3 additional offices, a state representative's aide, a journalist who had written a tangentially related piece 18 months prior, and a legal advocacy organization. The journalist didn't respond. The representative's aide sent the Bryce letter. The advocacy organization sent an intake form. Plus, she filled out the intake form. Month 11, Tuesday morning and March. Zoe's sock in her fist. In the eagle with the mustache, and the 4-second pause that was already becoming history before anyone had decided to witness it. And me, finally, with 4 words in a secondary log that nobody reads. She was never pretending. Plus, I don't know if that absolves me. I'm not writing this down because it does. I wasn't there. I want to be honest about that. Everything I know about Tuesday, I know secondhand. From the debrief report, from Linda's account. From a 2-paragraph incident log filed by Agent Delgado, who was one of the 2 people who got out of the vehicle and who has a dry, compressed way of writing that tells you nothing about what a thing felt like and everything about the shape of it. I've gotten good at reading the shape. The vehicle, pretty much, arrived at 8:14 a.m. Mara was walking Zoe to school. They did this every day. The 3-block walk that Zoe used for a running narration of whatever had accumulated in her brain overnight, which Mara listened to with a specific quality of attention that Linda hadn't and privately admired for months. Not distracted, not performatively present. Just there. Turned toward the girl, even when she was tired. Even in month 7. Even in month 10. Even now. They were half a block from the school when the vehicle pulled to the curb. Black. And unmarked, except for a small federal agency identifier on the rear panel that Mara clocked immediately. Her eyes went to it before the doors opened. Because she had looked up what those identifiers looked like 11 months ago, the way you look up things you need to be able to recognize on a bad day. She had planned for this day. Not this version of it, not the good version. She had planned for the other version, the one where the vehicle arrived to tell her she was wrong or delusional, or had filed something incorrectly that was now a problem, or any of the 17 bad outcomes she had mapped in the notebook she kept separate from the file. She hadn't planned for Agent Delgado to get out of the vehicle and say, "Ms. Vasquez, we, I think, need to speak with you. We've reviewed your case." Plus, she hadn't planned for the second agent, a woman, Delgado's report says Agent Reyes, to crouch down to Zoe's level without being asked and say, "You go on ahead. For your mom's going to be just a few minutes." She hadn't planned for Zoe to look at her mother's face first. The actually check and, "Is it okay?" She hadn't planned for the thing that happened to her own face when she realized it was. Linda, pretty much, watched from her driveway. She'd, been getting into her car, late for work, already holding her keys, when she saw Mara stop on the sidewalk. Linda's first thought, she told the debrief team, was that Zoe had dropped something. And then she saw the vehicle. Then she saw the suits. Then she saw Mara's face. Plus, she said pretty much she couldn't describe it exactly. She tried 3 times. The debrief TBH officer, not me, someone else, someone who doesn't keep secondary logs, wrote down, "Witness describes subject's expression as notable." I would have written it down differently. What Linda actually said was, it was like watching someone who's been holding their breath for a year finally. And then she stopped. She said, "I don't know. I don't have the word for it." The hand went over her mouth then, and Linda's hand, over her own, to be honest, mouth, like she was trying to keep something in. Zoe walked the last half block to school alone. She was 7. She had, I think, 1 sock on, and the other was in her fist. She had been doing the half-block walk alone twice a week for 3 months. because her mother had been quietly, methodically teaching her to. Because her mother had been preparing for the possibility of a Tuesday morning where she would need Zoe to know how. The girl did not look back. Plus, that's in Delgado's report. 2 words. Child proceeded, and but I know what it means. Because I know what Mara had spent 3 months building into her daughter's spine when the girl wasn't watching. The knowing that yes wasn't just a sound her mother made. It was a thing her mother built with her hands every day, out of nothing much. She proceeded. The conversation with Delgado and Reyes lasted 22 minutes on the sidewalk outside Zoe's school. I've the summary, and I won't summarize it here because summaries do a particular kind of violence to things that took 11 months to become true. What I will say is that the case wasn't resolved in 22 minutes. Cases are not resolved in 22 minutes. What happened in pretty much 22 minutes was that 2 people told Mara Vasquez on a sidewalk in March that her documentation was credible, that her account was credible, that the process would move forward under a different authority, and that she would receive confirmation in writing within the week. In my opinion, confirmation in writing. After 11 months of confirmation in, writing meaning nothing. She asked one question. Delgado's report records it verbatim, because Delgado is thorough in a way that's dismissive, which is rarer than it sounds. What changed? The answer is in a box I can't open. In my opinion, I know what changed. I'm what changed. My phone call, my flag, my 4 words in a secondary log that nobody reads. But I also know that what changed was Mara, filing for the 44th time when she had already survived 43 no's, and that without that 44th, I would have hadn't thing to flag, and that the flag without the 44 times before it would have been a flag on nothing. We both built Tuesday. She built 11 months of it. I built 1 phone call. I'm writing that down too, and Linda was still in her driveway when Mara walked back. She said later that she'd considered pretending not to see her. Getting in the car, sort of driving away. Because what do you say? What is the sentence you say to a woman you told gently, kindly, over coffee because you were worried about her? Maybe you should talk to someone. What do you say on the other side of that? Mara saved her well, from having to figure it out. She walked past Linda's driveway and stopped and looked at her and said, I have to go to work. Do you want to get dinner Friday? Just that. Linda said yes. Then, Mara, and Mara said, Friday. She kept walking. I don't know what Friday looked like. I don't know, to be honest, if they talked about it. I don't know if Mara said I told you or if she said nothing about it at all. I sort of don't know if Linda cried again or if Mara let herself be soft for one night inside someone else's kitchen. Or if Zoe came with them and ate too much bread and fell asleep against her mother's shoulder with the total structural trust of a child who has learned what yes is made of. I don't know. I know Mara walked 3 blocks back to work with a confirmation number in her phone and a 4-inch tabbed folder in a canvas tote bag and a daughter who proceeded. I know Linda's hand was over her mouth. And I know 11 months is a long time to be right when everyone needs you to be wrong. I know some verifications arrive in black vehicles and some never arrive at all, and that the difference between those 2 outcomes is sometimes 1 phone call and sometimes it isn't. Thing rational. Nothing you can file in triplicate and prove. I keep writing things down because someone has to believe it matters before it does.